Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Hahn, and I am facilitating the afternoon webinar series for Corwin. Welcome to Hattie's new #1 effect size, Collective Teacher Efficacy, with Kristin Anderson.
Thank you to everyone on the line for taking the time to spend with us today to explore what I think is an incredibly vital topic for us to unpack as educators, and is something that is also, there's a lot of new learning around in the field, especially over the course of the last 12 months. And so I'm incredibly privileged to spend this time with you. And I just want to say thank you. I know that educators never complain that they have too much time on their hands. And I also know that you have a lot of things going on. And so the fact that you chose to spend your time with us right now is incredibly meaningful to me and to Corwin, and I look forward to learning with you. As was just mentioned, please submit your questions in the manner with which they were encouraged to share. And I will have 2 separate times during this webinar to address those questions. And then anything we can't get to, we're happy to send responses to you post-event as well. So absolutely excited to learn with you and to reflect and dialogue through those questions. And I also just wanted to let you know that I have a Twitter handle as well. You see the Twitter handle for Corwin and a hashtag, CorwinVL, that brings you into a more ubiquitous visible learning conversation. And my handle for Twitter is @KristiAndy, which is KristiAnde. And so if you have new learnings over the course of this webinar, would absolutely love to hear them on Twitter as well, and I will directly dialogue with you as a result of those new learnings or questions that you may have. So how will we know if we're successful by the end of this webinar? It's always important that as adults or for our student learners that we have a clear path and a picture of success. And our goal by the end of this session is that we're able to articulate some of those key findings from the visible learning research, and we're able to begin to describe some of the key characteristics of teacher collective efficacy. So just a bit of a review for those of you who may be somewhat new to the visible learning research or not quite familiar with the story. Not an extensive review, I will say. For a more extensive review, I've recorded a few webinars that are archived on the Corwin website. Visible Learning 101, there was a part A and a part B. And like I said, I think those recordings are archived on our website under our webinar recordings. And that would go more into the research more extensively for those of you who are interested. Just wanted to make sure you had that resource. But Professor John Hattie is a man who was deeply concerned about the practices that educators embed and why we do what we do. And more particularly, do we know or are we aware of the impact that various practices that we adapt and adopt as educators, are we aware of the impact that those practices have? And so what he did was he spent about 2 decades collecting research on 150 practices in teaching, learning, and leadership. And those practices could span anywhere from cooperative learning to reducing class size to homework. And he wanted to know, of those 150 practices, what makes the greatest impact on student achievement. And really, his desire was to arm educators with the evidence to empower them to make decisions not based off of myth or feeling about what we think works, but based off of what we know for certain has caused growth in students and gains in student achievement. And what he found in his research is that 95% of all of those 150 practices that he spent 2 decades collecting research on, he found that 95% of those work. But the question isn't, does it work? I mean, I could get in my car today and it could sputter and the battery could barely turn on, or the engine could barely turn on because the battery is barely effective. There could be black smoke coming out of the back. It could have starts and stops, and it could work, quote unquote, but I would much rather prefer to be in a car that works best, that would guarantee to get me to my destination safely. And that's the same thing with education. Do we want to focus on what works, or do we want to focus on what works best? And so John prepared the world's largest research database of all time of what works and doesn't work in K-12 education to help us look at the evidence so we can avoid this type of decision-making in our schools. And every time I see this image, I smile immensely because I was that educator. I was the one in my classroom who was always working harder than my students, who was determined that my students would be highly successful and tried everything I possibly could to get them there. But at the end of the day, I didn't know if what I was doing was truly making an impact and if it would make the lasting impact that I wanted to see in terms of gains in student achievement and, more importantly, having the dispositions of a learner for a lifetime. And so every time we went to take the state assessment, I would be the teacher standing there with my fingers crossed behind my back, hoping that one of the many tactics I took worked and would make the impact that year. And because of the visible learning research, we don't have to be that teacher with our fingers crossed behind our back. We don't have to be that leader hoping. We don't have to ride on belief. We can ride on evidence. So when this initial collection of 150 practices was published in 2008, it was a collection of 800 plus meta-analyses, over 50,000 studies, and over 250 million students studied worldwide. And it took the world by storm and was called Teaching's Holy Grail as far as the collection of research that was amassed to begin to help dispel these myths. And if there's one thing that John Hattie has been consistently is he is a consummate collector of research. And over the course of his collection of research, he has not stopped collecting studies on the 150 initial practices that were published in 2008. And he has also added to that initial list of the 150 practices. And now he has over 230 practices in education that he has studied. He has over 1,200 meta-analysis in his collection, over 65,000 studies, and over 250 million students worldwide, close to 300,000. And so not only was the research incredibly profound in 2008, it continues to grow in expanse. It also continues to tell the narrative that the original research told. And that is, the more evidence that we gather, the more studies that are put together, the more the story stays the same. What works, works really well, and what kind of works, still kind of works, and what doesn't work so hot still continues to not work. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful pieces of this research database. The 150 practices were published in this white book, the Visible Learning book, in 2008. He did follow that publication up with the book Visible Learning for Teachers, and that book included a few new practices from the original 150, but was mostly an attempt to focus on what sat at the top of the research. So there's chapters on teacher clarity, on feedback, on other information. And there has not been a publication of the current collection of over 230 practices and the mass amount of studies that I just showed you until last August when John published an article with Professor Donahue on learning strategies, a synthesis and conceptual model, where he began to unveil the collection of 230 as they unfolded with some of the new learnings and new methodologies studied. And I direct your attention to that because if you haven't seen that article, that's definitely one to acquire, and we would be happy to send that to anyone who might be interested. In John's massive collection of research, he never included a study unless it showed an impact on student achievement one way or another. A lot of people ask if John considered whether it was the feelings or the thought processes behind certain practices or what it did for a child emotionally. And that wasn't the purpose of amassing this collection of research. It was to show if a practice made an impact on student achievement one way or another. And basically what he did is taking a method called Cohen's D. He would take the studies that were included in the meta-analyses and he put them on a common scale to determine their impact. And so that would be the scores of the assessments associated with those studies. And what he found is the typical effect size within the research is a 0.40. And what we refer to in the research, a 0.40 is called the hinge point. And a hinge point is reflective of 1 year's growth approximately over 1 year's time. And so remember a couple of slides ago, I told you and shared with you that John found 95% of the things that we do as educators of that initial 150 practices that they work. Well, they work if your benchmark is 0. But if we want to have 1 year's growth or more for kids over 1 year's time, the 0.40 effect is incredibly important and a benchmark for us to measure our impact. And as you'll see, a good percentage of those 95% lie within the 0 to 0.4 effect. But it's those things above the 0.4 that we really want to be focusing on that really yield the growth that every child absolutely deserves. As educators, it's our mandate, our moral imperative that we achieve at least a year's growth over a year's time for every kid. And in many, many instances, our children demand 2 years growth over a year's time or 3 years growth over a year's time. And so knowing our impact is incredibly important. And to kind of help explain this a little bit more and just break it down a bit, I wanted to show you this barometer of influence. And so any practice that yields that 1 year's growth over 1 year's time or higher would be said to be in that blue zone of desired effects. And in the research, 0.4 is the standard deviation. And so if you multiply it by 2 at a 0.8, that is approximately 2 years growth over 1 year time. If you multiply it by 3 at a 1.2 effect, that's approximately 3 years growth over 1 year's time, et cetera. It is also true that if you half it and you get a 0.2, that's approximately a half year's growth over a year's time. Or a 0.10 is about a quarter of a year's growth over 1 year's time. So we've labeled the zone that's about a half year's growth over a year's time to a little less than a year's growth over a year's time, typical teacher effects. And that zone is labeled as such because in the research, what we have found is the average teacher worldwide gets approximately a half year's growth to a little less than a year's growth over a year's time for their kids. And as educators, this is probably both appalling and makes sense as well, especially for those of you in the secondary setting where you have inherited kids who have had that average growth over time and know the imperative of doubling and tripling down on growth with the kids that you have. Any practice that is just a tick above 0 or little growth or impact to about less than a half year's growth over a year's time, that's called the zone of developmental effects. And it's labeled as such because any practice with an effect size in that range is actually the equivalent to having the Walmart greeter in the classroom. And that is as such that basically because a child is growing and developing and maturing anyway, implementing a practice with an effect size in this range will get you the same growth as would naturally happen because of their maturation. And then there are a few practices, but less than 5% in all of the research that do have reverse effects or make a child go backward over time. as John Hattie says, there's actually very little that we do that harms kids, so that's a good thing. But there is quite a bit in that range of the 0 to less than a 0.4 that has not quite so high of an effect or in that zone of desired effects where we want to be. So the research is also expansive in the sense that it spans the curriculum, the student, the school, the home, the teacher, and the approaches to teaching. And this is significant because there have been some attempts over time at taking meta-analyses and determining the impact of certain practices in education. For example, in the early 2000s, when Classroom Instruction That Works by Marzano was published, that was an attempt to take teaching strategies within the classroom, determine an effect size, and determine which ones are more significant in moving student achievement. Those were a handful of practices that teachers would be responsible for implementing directly within the course of instruction, or School Leadership That Works. That was about a handful of practices that leaders can employ that show growth on student achievement. But Hattie's research takes what the teacher does in the classroom alongside what the leader does and what happens in many other areas across what is now 230 practices, and is the most expansive body of research we have seen in education and continues to be to date. As you can see on this slide, basically the research divides into these buckets where looking at the practices, the majority of them are about what the students and the teachers do within the classroom to yield as much growth as possible in student achievement. And you can see that the teacher has significant impact overall in a variety of influences to get higher than that 0.4 growth. And if there is one message in this research that I think is the biggest message of hope and optimism for our field and our practice, it is this. Nearly every practice that is above a 0.4 effect size is directly within the teacher's control or the teacher's influence. In fact, there are very, very few that are not. And that is an incredible signal of uplift to us in this field, because there are days where we feel like we can't make an impact. There are students we feel like it's hard to move. There are times when we think that the external circumstances are greater than what is in us and what is inside us. But this research tells us that the teacher can transcend any external circumstances that the student may come with, and what they cause in the classroom to promote learning and to have the learner own their own learning journey can override any other narrative. And we see this consistently throughout the research. And so this slide is what sits in some of the practices that sit in the top 20 for the current body of research. And so you will see practices like teacher-student relationships with a 0.72 effect size, almost doubles the speed of learning. Those healthy teacher-student relationships where students feel valued and honored as people, and their humanity is uplifted, and they want to trust their teacher, and they want to take risks, and they want to grow, and they want to learn. You see feedback at number 10 with a 0.73 effect size. Again, it almost doubles the speed of learning. This feedback is not just about the way we give feedback, but it's also about how students seek feedback, how students give each other feedback, and grow within the process. You see at number 8, you see teacher clarity about success criteria, and that clarity is key to accomplishing so many of the things that sit at the very top of the research. Clear learning intentions, clear success criteria, clear learning progressions, and a clear sense of why all of that is happening, along with clear lesson design and clear lesson delivery, makes feedback possible, makes so many other elements possible. So those items are all near the top, and then the reason why we are focusing today on teacher collective efficacy is you can see it is the new number one effect in that group of over 230 practices that John is studying. In the initial publication of Visible Learning and the 150 practices, self-reported grades or assessment-capable visible learners was always the number one with a 1.44 effect size. And I am happy to say that just because there is a new number one with teacher collective efficacy, it does not mean that self-reported grades aren't still astronomically effective and an incredibly worthy cause to pursue. Basically, this is referring to agency within learners and students who own their own learning journey. They know where they're going, they know how they're going, and they know where to next. They are able to give, seek, receive, and act upon feedback. They have the dispositions of a learner, the effective habits of thinking and doing. They also have clarity to help them have assessment capability and setting goals and direction for their learning journey. And really the word that best describes it is agency. These students are empowered learners where learning is visible through their eyes on a regular basis. And so while that remains at the very top, that score hasn't wavered, the effect size hasn't wavered, and that practice, the more studies that are continuously added to it, the more incredibly important it is at almost 3.5 years growth over a year's time. We have teacher collective efficacy at 1.57, which is almost approximately 4 years growth over 1 year time. So incredibly excited to begin to unpack that topic a bit with you today for the course of the rest of this webinar. This is one time where I am going to stop turning on the fire hose of information. I just hit you with a lot because this is a lot about the practices that influence teaching, learning, and leadership in so many ways. And I'm going to invite anyone who has questions at this time about the research to share those via chat if you haven't done so already, or to seek any clarity. And then we'll give a couple minutes for that, and I'll move on to the second part of this, which is unpacking that efficacy.
Hi, Kristin. It's Jeff. I haven't received any questions yet. Let's sit tight. Maybe some will come in now.
Perfect. As an educator, I am very good at allowing for wait time, so I'm happy to a tiny bit.
No, most people are saying what an excellent job and no questions on clarity at this time. Here's one. Here's a question. Does student self-reported grades include student goal setting?
Yes, it absolutely does. So part of assessment capability is the ability not only to report what kind of grade you would receive on an assessment or on a performance task before you even get into it, but it's the fact that you know what you know what you don't know, and you set goals based off your assessment and your learning trajectory to be able to get what you don't know so you're more powerful in the future. So yes, absolutely.
Can you clarify what teacher efficacy would look like in an everyday setting? Some sort of examples? I've been having a hard time visualizing that.
Oh, good. Well, that's actually a great segue to the next part of this webinar, so that is perfect. And if there's no other questions about the research, we will go there now.
Terrific.
All good?
All good.
All right.
We have a lot of questions in the Q&A section, actually.
Oh.
Alrighty. Is there a particular book that is best at describing and explaining each of these topics?
Yeah, so the initial white book on visible learning, the 150 practices when it was published in 2008, basically that's a reference guide of the initial 150, and it unpacks, giving a page or two to each one, that shows the effect size, some of the major bodies of research that sit underneath that effect size, and begins to unpack exactly what that is. So the white book is helpful like an encyclopedia or a phone book type of thing. It's absolutely not a snuggle up by the bedside at night and enjoy leisurely reading. But if you wanted to know if gender grouping in the middle school is an effective practice because you want to separate all the hormones and put the girls in one room and the boys in another room, then absolutely look up ability grouping and look up gender differences of the 150 practices in the white book and understand more about the research and the findings therein. Mike Schmoker once said that the value of data and research, I would put in parentheses, is in the questions that it makes us ask, not in the answers that it gives us. And so when you have a resource like that white book, it should spark a lot of questions and dialogue and reflection in order to cause praxis. But it absolutely should not, just looking at something and saying, okay, well, providing formative evaluation has a 0.90 effect size. I've got to only do that, and I cannot do what is number 75 any longer. There's a great dependency on the effect sizes and the practices therein and how they marry up to each other to cause a greater effect. So it's the questions that should make us ask by looking at a resource like the white book. The blue book, Visible Learning for Teachers, published in 2011, it does unpack more of those practices that sit at the top. So it unpacks teacher clarity in a chapter, it unpacks feedback, it unpacks mind frames or the belief system that's required in order to enact these effects. And so that's also a good read if you want to focus on some of those that sit at the very top.
Thanks. I have some more questions if you'd like.
Great. I can take maybe 2 more and then we'll get into the rest of the webinar.
Perfect. As a principal, how do you build teachers' collective efficacy?
So I have that in the next slides. Actually, my very last slide is what can leaders do to build collective efficacy. So,
terrific. We'll go. And then the last one is by micro-teaching. Do you mean workshop or mini lessons differentiated for students?
That's a great question. No, I mean when teachers are put into a shrinking machine and they become tiny little teachers and they micro-teach. Just kidding. That's not even really that funny, I know. But micro-teaching is actually the art of filming your practice and then watching your practice back on video, doing it because you are driving your own improvement and performance, not because somebody is mandating that you are evaluated or somebody else is necessarily even looking at it. But the art of filming your own practice, watching your practice, setting a goal or 2 for yourself as a result of watching that film, and then setting strategies in place to achieve the goal, taping yourself again, determining if you've met the goal, if you need to go back and do something different. So it is such a high effect because it's an autonomous effort of improvement, which means empowerment, agency, and ownership on behalf of the learner, which oftentimes is the teacher. So wonderful questions. I'm so glad you're all here and with me, and I love the learning that we're doing together. And so now we'll move into this next part of the webinar on efficacy. And one thing that I wanted to encourage you to do real quick is, I think efficacy is one of those words that we've heard thrown around, whether it's in research, in the field, or even in our personal lives. Maybe something doesn't make us feel very efficacious, or we want to experience efficacy in a greater way. But I'm not sure it's one that we've taken a lot of time in the field to truly unpack. So I just wanted to ask you to take about 90 seconds, 2 minutes, and just brainstorm what you know efficacy to be, definitions, terms, phrases, whatever the case is, and we'll get right back together. All right. So I know that you did some deep thoughting around efficacy. And I just wanted to share with you what some of my learnings were as I began to unpack the term efficacy. So the very definitions I found include the ability to produce a desired or intended result, the quality of being successful, the power to be effective, the ability to get a job done satisfactorily, maximum response achievable, and how well something works. It's interesting because the maximum response achievable definition actually came from the pharmaceutical field as they measure the efficacy of new drugs to hit the market. And they measure that efficacy to see if the maximum response was achievable with the drug as it came to market. It's interesting as well because that's actually the term that most resonated with me when I think about efficacy from an individual level to a collective level. I think about getting the maximum response achievable from all areas of the building, from students and parents to teachers and leaders, that maximum response achievable. So in order to get to teacher collective efficacy, it starts with self-efficacy. And I think that this is really important to settle on for a minute and really reflect on, because a lot of times in our buildings, we desire for teams to have great efficacy, to be highly collaborative, to be highly functioning. And sometimes we forget about the importance of our efficacy building that desired effect and it being okay to start with us. Having hosted many conferences on behalf of Corwin, we usually have a panel discussion at some point during some of the conferences. And it usually seems that there's always somebody on the panel discussion that is asked a question by an audience member that is something like, I'm only one person, I've come here alone, and I feel like there's nothing I can do to make the change that I've learned at this conference and that I want to see at my school site. What can I do? And all of the research that I have come across is you're not only one person, you are one person. And when we have high self-efficacy and we have that deep belief that my work makes a difference on student achievement, that I can meet the needs of all of my students, that the teachers in my school are improving learning for all students, and that I am capable of something extraordinary, it's flipping that paradigm of I'm not here with a team or I can only do so much to I can do so much. And so self-efficacy by some research from Bandura in 1977 is the definition of that conviction that one can successfully execute the behavior required to produce the outcomes. So as you think about fostering collective efficacy at your site, the first thing I would ask yourself is that individual self-efficacy evident in your educators and in the people that you work with in order to foster that and bring it to the next level? It actually reminds me of Stephen Covey's research in the book, The Speed of Trust, around waves of trust. And he talks about how in order to get to a societal change or to change the community that's around us and to have that trust be pervasive and manifest throughout, it absolutely starts with the ability to trust ourselves. And then we can get into a trusting relationship. Then we can get into a trusting organization, a market, and society. And in a school, I would say that that's manifest from self to a relationship with a critical colleague, a mentor, a coach, a same grade level teacher, someone in our content area. Organization would be our team, third grade team or high school electives team or whatever the case is. Market would be our whole school, and then society would be our community in this model. And again, just kind of illustrating that importance of starting with self and self-efficacy to get the results that we want. And I thought this was such a beautiful parallel because part of collective efficacy is having deep trust across all levels, and the two are inextricably linked. So Jenny Donahue, who is one of our most brilliant Corwin authors, and she will actually be keynoting at our annual Visible Learning Conference this summer in San Francisco. She wrote a beautiful book that came out near the end of 2016 on collective efficacy. And she defines collective efficacy as when teachers believe that together they and their colleagues can impact student achievement, and that they share a sense then of collective efficacy. And notice how that self-belief is so important, because if I don't have the self-belief, how can I believe together with someone in this definition? Research from Hoy and others say that collective efficacy is associated with the tasks, level of effort, persistence, shared thoughts, stress levels, and achievement of groups. And we know from the research that efficacious teachers are ones who attribute any type of failure to not having a sufficient strategy or to not putting enough individual effort into that strategy, but they have high belief in themselves and what they can cause, so they attribute that failure to the science of how to improve what they're seeking to improve instead of doubting themselves tremendously. Whereas inefficacious teachers attribute their failures to lack of ability, and they believe that they're not capable of meeting the needs of their students. And what we've seen is sometimes this is masked in a lack of belief and ability can sometimes be masked in placing blame or shifting blame to something else, like the teacher in the teacher lounge who focuses on it being the fault of the learner, or that there's not two parents in the home, or that there's not a wealth of books when they get home, or they haven't been fed, or whatever the case is. But we know that sometimes there's something more deeply seated, which is coming to terms with their beliefs about themselves and what they can cause, especially when we're supported by work like the Visible Learning research that helps us know that to get a year's growth over a year's time or more for kids, almost everything is within our control and influence. And so, again, that difference in belief between an efficacious teacher and an inefficacious teacher is evident in how they feel about themselves and their practice. So collective teacher efficacy then could also be further defined by research in 2008 as teachers who believe they can teach all children in ways that enable them to meet high standards, and they're more likely to exhibit teaching behaviors that support this goal. So as you notice, it's rooted in belief. It's rooted then practices that are rooted and deeply seated in this belief that cause that collective efficacy to exist. And when high collective efficacy exists, it results in all of these and much, much more. And some of those involve greater levels of planning and organization or openness to new ideas, fewer discipline referrals, increased best sharing of practice, and there are so many other outcomes that are possible. Recently, I attended a masterclass with Hattie in Sydney, where he spoke on collective efficacy and all of his learning around the new number one effect. And I just made a word bubble of all of the words that he associated through his collection of the research on collective efficacy. And what you can see is some of these involve what efficacy is as far as actions, like helping and challenge and creating agency and forming strategy. And some of these can also be then the end result of when efficacy exists. This is what we see, like enthusiasm, like collaboration, like success, like trust, dynamism, some of those more effective results that we can see as a result of having this collective efficacy. And what I'd like you to do right now is, just looking at this word bubble, I'd like you to identify a couple of words that stand out to you as words that you would like to be pervasive throughout your setting, whether it's working at a district office or working as a leader of a school, working within a teacher team. What are some of the words that you would just absolutely aspire to see in your building and would love to have as a result of fostering collective efficacy in a greater way? Go ahead and take a minute or so and identify one of those desired outcomes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move us along, but I encourage you to take one of or two of those words and post it somewhere that ends up being a beacon for what it is that you're trying to create, because fostering collective efficacy and going about the diligent work of making it happen is enduring and long and tiresome and so absolutely worth it. And so having something that we hold out as a goal is absolutely appropriate to guide us through that massive effort. Jenny Donahue also in her book on teacher collective efficacy says that when a sense of collective efficacy is present, our staff maintain school environments in which students feel good about themselves. So it's not just the enthusiasm of the adults, even though that is certainly an aspirational goal to achieve and something that is necessary for efficacy, but it is students feeling good about themselves as learners, feeling as though they're making progress, feeling as though they can make mistakes in a supportive environment because they're all part of the learning journey, and they know that they are making growth accordingly. So there are 4 sources of efficacy that we have learned from research by Goddard in 2004. And the first one is mastery experiences. And mastery experiences are when a team's experience and success cause collective efficacy and increases the team's to come to expect that effective performances will repeat. So basically, success breeding success, whether that's in small clusters or larger clusters, feeling like a goal has been met, a goal has been mastered, attained to, and then using the efficacy that comes as a result of that mastery experience to feed future mastery experiences, which breeds efficacy. Another one is vicarious experiences, and that's when a school staff sees others who have similar opportunities or challenges and they have performed well, or they've overcome, or they've generated an outcome that is larger than the average result. And this is where reading case studies, seeing videos, reading books by practitioners, hearing the voices of other schools presenting at conferences, all of those things give us vicarious experiences that are necessary in order to breed our own collective efficacy, because we have to know that what we're seeking is possible and that people who have a similar situation to us can achieve that as well. That's one of the things I actually love about our annual Visible Learning Conference is it's full of 80 sessions of practitioners who share their journeys at their school sites all across the world. And in the sharing of those journeys, they do provide those vicarious experiences to build collective efficacy for others. The next one is social persuasion. And social persuasion is where educators are kind of persuaded by credible and trustworthy educators to overcome challenges. So this could be anywhere from reading that they do, or when someone comes to their school for professional learning sessions, or attending a webinar, but getting persuaded with new learning in order to take that information and to make the change that they like to seek is part of also building that efficacy. And then the fourth one is affective states, which are feelings of excitement or anxiety associated with an individual's perceptions of his or her capacity or competence, or the emotional tone of an organization. And so as leaders, it's important that we acknowledge all 4 phases of efficacy and that we have plans around all 4 of them in order to increase that. Paul Bloomberg and Barb Pitchford have a beautiful book and body of work around impact teams, which is a vehicle to foster collective efficacy. And they have created a continuum that basically identifies when there is high teacher collective efficacy and when there is low efficacy, what happens within the continuum. And so you can see, for example, that high collective teacher efficacy is optimistic. We have a shared belief that all students could achieve at least a year's growth over a year's time, or whatever the overarching goal is that we're collectively working toward. And if there's low collective teacher efficacy, then there would be a pervasive doubt, feeling powerless over a circumstance beyond our control or undesirable results. And you see how that's manifest then throughout within confidence and collaboration, and how the learners see themselves as learners and value error and seek feedback and learn from one another, and what that does for our dispositions such as perseverance as well. And so I'm sure as some of you are looking at this, you're kind of evaluating your own faculty or your own situation and determining, are there high amounts of collective teacher efficacy? Are there lower amounts? Which is very appropriate to do and important as you think about crafting your next steps. So what are a few immediate practices that leaders can do to build collective teacher efficacy, besides being very aware of the phases that collective teacher efficacy can be formed through? Building awareness of collective teacher efficacy and of the state that you would like to get your educators to. Empowering teachers with shared decision-making so everyone feels like they're part of what's happening in the building, the overall collective goal. John Maxwell has a great way of saying that. He says people are up on what they're in on. And so getting them aligned to the progress that you desire to make. Inspiring group purpose, not just individual purpose, and designing and delivering efficacious professional learning experiences that create places for that efficacy to be fostered, whether it's through external experts or whether it's through, seeing those models of similar schools or buildings, or if it's unpacking the emotional element of efficacy. Whatever the case is, designing and delivering those experiences are also incredibly important. And so I'll just wrap up because I know that we've already gone through a whole lot in a short period of time. But Visible Learning, we have an extensive offering of professional learning that supports all of the work that John Hattie has found in the research and helps to build schools that focus on knowing their impact and creating those visible learners and creating that agency for adults and for kids. And so if you want to know any more about that, here is some of the information. It is phenomenal work, and we have so many school sites all over the world that are engaged in it and making incredible growth in efficacy and in teacher practice and in empowering learners on a regular basis. This slide cracks me up. This was me last summer. If you enjoyed this webinar and want to see more of me, that sounds so funny to say, I'm the most humble person, so this is kind of odd. But I will be keynoting at the annual Visible Learning Conference in San Francisco, and we would love to have you attend. And we've made a special code for you that if you attended this webinar and want to attend, you can receive $50 off your registration. Also, I mentioned Jenny Donahue is a keynoter, and her book and body of work in professional learning around teacher collective efficacy is a must read and must experience because she has become quite an expert on this. And that is a picture of her book there on the left. And then we also just have highlighted Paul Bloomberg and Barb Pitchford's work on leading impact teams, which are a vehicle to creating that culture of efficacy, and are offering 20% off as a result of attending this webinar as well. So I will just open it up to any few lingering questions that may be remaining, and then we can close out.
Yeah, I have 3 questions that came in. This is from somebody who writes that they read Visible Learning for Teachers, and on page 67 today for their staff meeting. And some of our grades, elementary school, are departmentalized. For example, in grade 5, one teacher teaches reading and writing while the other is responsible for math and science. When a grade level only has one teacher planning, it makes teacher collaboration very difficult. Can you talk about departmentalization and if that is a successful practice, since it seems to run counter or be problematic to what you're discussing? So thoughts on departmentalizing as a practice in elementary school?
Well, that's a beautiful question, and that is not the first time I've received that question either, which I will just acknowledge that departmentalization does make establishing efficacy more tricky, but it doesn't make it impossible. And in fact, there are practices at schools all over the world who have that level of departmentalization have embedded in order to still make great strides in collective efficacy and do what kids need. So if you, through messaging, I would be happy to introduce you to some of those strategies and further explore that research. So I would just say, definitely don't be discouraged. It's not a setup that is doomed for failure. There's just some things we need to look at differently.
Terrific. I have another question here. Let's see. We use learning targets within our school based on Hattie's research. And it seems a lot of teachers are very negative about them. As a newer teacher within the school, what is something Hattie says is a way I can help my colleagues be more positive?
Well, I have always heard of learning targets referred to as the destination of the learning journey. So what is the destination by the end of class, which would be a short-term learning target? What is the destination by the end of a unit, which is longer term, or even by the end of the year and where we're headed? And what we know from all the research is that teacher clarity through learning intentions or target success criteria gives students a sense of ownership and empowerment, and also does the same for the teacher. If it's equated to a destination, for a teacher to stop and to think about how it would feel to be told that they need to go somewhere, like let's say some place that a professional learning workshop is happening, but they're never told the address, and they're never given directions on how to get there, they would go to that destination completely lost and completely frustrated, always trying to find the target, never hitting it. And a lot of times what we perceive as student lack of engagement is actually caused by a lack of clarity in the classroom. And when teachers can set learning targets and provide that clarity, but also provide a compelling why the learning target must be mastered, that does increase the efficacy of the learner. They make progress and they can see themselves as being successful. And when teachers see students making progress and mastering the learning targets and the success criteria, they also have a tremendous sense of efficacy and satisfaction, knowing that they're causing the growth that they're there to cause. And so part of it is staying the course and being very consistent about not just the target, but the success criteria and the why, to ensure all are operating in concert every day and seeing what that causes over time. I think a lot of teachers don't feel efficacious by that practice because it's hard work and because it's different than some of the ways that people have been operating, but any system that has stayed the course has seen incredible results. And we know from all the research That teacher clarity is a 0.75 effect size, almost 2 years growth over 1 year time. And we know that success criteria as evaluated separately in the new body of research is a 0.93. And so all incredibly important. And when there is success, it breeds empowerment and satisfaction. Great question.
We're right at about 7:30. Do you want to answer any more questions, or do you want to answer them and have the answers sent to everybody? I have them listed here.
I think what we'll do is I'll respond to the rest of the outstanding questions as they've come in via chat through email or other functions so that we can make sure we keep this to the hour and honor everyone's time. But we'll definitely be in touch with answers to those questions. And I just really can't tell you how much, again, I value your investment today and the fact that you have partnered with Corwin in this learning. And we would be honored and thrilled to partner with you in any additional way to extend your learning journey. So thank you so very much and have a beautiful Monday.